Hello. Every once in a while I get motivated to do a video like this, and I'm glad to. This is going to be some sort of a how-to, but not exactly. I like to see such videos as hybrids between how, why not, things like that, okay? So this in front of us, this vehicle is a 2012 Infiniti M56, and this engine right here is a 5.6 liter VK56VD engine from Nissan. It's using the M56, Q70, 5.6, QX80, Armada, QX56, things like that. So by the end of today's video, I will have talked about oil catch cans, but more accurately, the discussion is going to be on the PCV system, positive crankcase ventilation. All right. So the reason I'm making this video is because I saw a forum posting by somebody, and he or she, I can't really tell at this point, asked a question about oil catch cans. It was posted on a thread, and the member asked, what do you install them at the top, at the bottom? Where exactly do they go? It's a little confusing. And as of this moment, no one's responded to that yet, including me, but hopefully this video changes that, right? So, I wanted to make this video to kind of guide people who wanted to install catch cans on their vehicles as to where you do it. All right. So, let's just jump right to it. Okay. Infiniti M56. This is your right side. This is your left side, right? Left side, and this is usually in reference to standing, or rather sitting in the driver's seat facing the front of the vehicle, right? So where your dipstick is on your left side, driver's side in the US, and then your oil filler neck is on your right side. If you wanted to install an oil catch can, this is where you do it. Let's get a light over here. Okay, on the right side, the passenger side, this is where you do it. Right here. See this tube? This tube that goes here, right behind your intake tube. Not this one, this one. Yeah, that's where you install it. So if this were a can called, winter, man. A little ashy, huh? If this were you can't call this a can, you'd set it right here and then somehow cut it or just get a different line, feed this line into as the inlet of your can, and then the outlet of your can is going to go to this line. All right. And on the driver's side, you have a little more hose to play with. This one right here. This is where you install your oil catch can, right? Okay. Makes sense. Pretty easy. And that's about it. That's about as much as I wanted to talk about with regards to the oil catch can. Yes, by the end of the video, I'll mention the oil catch can again. But this is why I said this is not a complete how-to, because you're not, by the end of the video, I'm not going to install any oil catch cans over here. So if that's not the material you're looking for, or rather, if that is a material you're looking for, and you're not interested in the technical discussion as to why not, how, where, you're welcome to jump off. It's only been 3.5 minutes, right? But for people who are more interested in the details as to why, please stick around and I'll tell you why. One of the reasons you won't see me do it is because personal opinion is that I do not like to use oil catch cans, but I still understand enough about the purpose and the intent that I can give you a guide as to how you could do it, especially with regards to this, with this engine. You can take some of the learnings and use it in other engines as well, but figured to just make it a quick one. If you want more detail, I think maybe much later we can break it down. All right. So let's talk about the PCV system, positive crankcase ventilation. The reason is this: whenever you have combustion happening, right, fuel, air, and compression, so your cylinder, this is your piston going up in the cylinder, compresses, but this thing is not all the way airtight. By the way, pardon me, it's not that bad. The light just makes it look really ashy. I'm not that bad. In real life, it doesn't look as bad as it's looking through the camera. And I've got a really bright light over there. All right. So when your piston goes up and compresses, it's not 100% airtight, as tight as would like it to be. But, you know, things happen. Physics happen. Physics happens. Expansion, contraction, and things like that. So you have a little bit of blow-by. Blow-by is usually a mixture of fuel, air. Usually, I'd say most of it is usually Is it burnt? Yeah, there is spark. It's just not exhaust. It hasn't gone out through your exhaust. It comes back down into the engine, right? Through the gaps in here after compression. But blow by, as I said, we can do a more technical video later, but blow by usually ends up behind the piston. And then it goes down into where your crankshaft is. So where your crankshaft is, you have this air, exhaust air, and, well, call it exhaust, but not really exhaust. And it's in your crankcase area. And you need to find a way to expel it. So crankcase area, that's why we talk about, it is crankcase fumes, crankcase gases. And if you guys remember the EGR systems all back in the day, exhaust gas recirculation, they had an advantage in that you had this preheated, premixed air that you send back into your intake manifold, right, into your intake stream, and then burn it again, right? Use it in combustion basically gives you a little bit of a head start. So this is not really EGR, but this is gases that have already been compressed in there or premixed and usually kind of burned way hotter, things like that. So what happens is that you need to get rid of that. All right. And so this is where we talk about the PCV system. The PCV system has like 4 main components, and I guess I'll need my flashlight again. All right. So this on the right side, this is what happens. This is your intake tube with a filter, which is hopefully cleaner than that one. Send it. This is a mass airflow sensor, intake tube, throttle body over here. Right before the throttle body, you have a tee off, and this tee right here, see this tube? It goes into the valve cover right there, and then what happens is that the air that you send, it's actually more of a drawing system. Air is actually drawn out because fresh air goes. You need to remove the blow-by gases, and the blow-by gases are usually sucked out through the PCV system. The PCV valve is right here, positive crankcase ventilation. So it's sucked out, but then to suck it out means you have to replace it with something because nature abhors a vacuum, right? So fresh air comes in here. This is called the fresh air intake hose or inlet or whatever, right? And as close as they look right here, physically, by routing and plumbing, they're not right next to each other. It circulates. You get pretty good circulation, right? This sucks out the dirty or the bad air or spent air, whatever you want to call it. It's blow by. And then this one right here puts in fresh air. Okay. Then what happens to this stuff right here after being sucked out? It goes through here and it has to get burnt. Right? It needs to get burnt at some point or reused, sort of a modern EGR system. So this tube over here goes over this. See this plastic piece? It's a little hard to see over here because, yeah, there you go. You can see the clamp. So this plastic piece goes over the intake runners. This is the positive. This is the even bank, right? The right bank is bank 2 on the V8. So cylinder number 2, 4, 6, and 8, right? All these share this tube, and you can barely see it, but that's where the air goes. So it gets reused and burnt again. All right. So let's jump to this other side. I'd say the driver's side is a little easier to, well, in certain respects, I guess. And I'm sorry if it's looking washed up, but so again, intake tube. This is your fresh air intake over here into the valve cover. This black piece is called the valve cover. And your PCV valve is actually under the intake right there. Jumps out, and then you have this long hose that sends it over here. See the common nipple? And then likewise, this one's a little clearer, at least in this part, sends it to this piece. It's pretty much a manifold. That's the whole definition of a manifold. And likewise, it sends the blow-by gases to this. This is number 1, number 3, number 5, number 7 over there. All right. So ideally, that's, well and good. Reusing your PCV gases is good for emissions, good for a little bit of efficiency, and efficiency and emissions usually go hand in hand typically. All right. So intentions are good, but sometimes, depending on your operating conditions, what speed your engine is running, what kind of oil you're running, oil temperatures, and other different things, your design, baffling, What happens is that you have oil in your crankcase, right? Remember crankcase ventilation, where your crankshaft is, right? And oil is in mist form, as you'd expect. Any hot liquid, hot yeah, oil as a liquid in this case, would have vapors in the air. So what happens is that as your engine is sucking up the air from the PCV system, it ends up picking up the vapors, oil vapors in your crankcase system, right? And those get picked up and get carried in the air, and they end up in the intake manifold. So for most cars I've dealt with, you can, well, let's put it like this. Most cars I've dealt with usually say that you should check your oil because some level of oil consumption is normal. I've seen this in Nissan V6s. I've seen this in Lexus V8s, V6s. I've seen it kind of all over. So for people who like to look at that dipsticks, that's pretty good, because over time you realize that you're getting a little bit of oil burning, right? You're losing oil. And PCV system is one of those ways or pathways to lose it. You're supposed to service them, replace those two valves, at some given interval, say 30,000 miles. So it's a weird two-prong system, or two-prong failure mode. And I'll talk about that. I could talk about that if people would like to hear that. But if you have bad PCV valves, you usually tend to lose way more oil through your dipstick, as measured through your dipstick. On the other hand, if they're functioning correctly, you do kind of get to see a little bit of PCV carried in there. As to how the oil loss happens, I can explain that a little later, because it's not that you end up losing it through your PCV only, actually end up losing it through your fresh air intake sometimes. And as I said, topic for a different time. So people sometimes notice oil loss from the crankcase. And as I've always preached, I take every video opportunity I can to say it. If you've got a V8 Nissan V8 sedan, you should always check your oil, right? These guys seem to always, they do consume oil like other engines, but they seem to be very unforgiving about their oil consumption and neglect that happens as a result of that, or due to that. So anyway, let's go back to the PCV talk. So oil consumption does happen, right? But then what you're thinking is, where does that oil go to? For many engines that consume oil, whenever people remove the intake manifold, and it's plastic in this case, whenever they remove it, they get a little bit of oil in the galley, is just caught up somewhere in there. All right. And usually, because of how fast your air is, being sucked in, oil just gets carried away and gets burnt. All right. But now this is where the catch happens. The VD engine, it's a direct injected engine. And the problem with that is that behind these intake runners, there are no fuel injectors. So what happens is that any oil that comes from the crankcase and ends up in the intake manifold, or rather in the runners in this case, because as you can see, this one dumps right here and straight into the head. It ends up on the back side of your intake valves. And whenever you have normal port injected manifolds, those just, whenever they inject fuel, they just basically clean anything in the airstream. In this case, the back of the intake valves. These guys do not. The injectors, since they're direct injected, this one's kind of covered, but they usually here. Oh, well, they're on the inside. They go straight into the cylinder, and maybe drawings and cutouts might help send that message better. But remember, we're going to try to circle back to the PCV discussion, to the oil catch can discussion, right? So what happens with these is that it ends up there, and you cannot, short of walnut blasting, there's really no other way to clean them, right? Generally not. So the intention then is that you install an oil catch can that should come in the airstream and catch oil before it makes it to your intake manifold. And pardon me, I'm going to jump to, I do have another engine here that I wanted to show. All right, here. There you go. This one looks much better. This is the right side. This is the oil filler neck. And as I said, this is the fresh air intake. It's the one in the back. And the PCV valve is the one in front. And as you can see here, these are angled. The fresh air intake goes straight up. The PCV valve is angled towards the inside. On the other side, what you have is this is your fresh air intake right here, shooting straight up at a V, and the PCV valve is the same actually. And right now I can't really disconnect this. Try to pull. No, but yeah, so there you go. This is what I was talking about. So what happens is that most people assume that all your oil that ends up in the intake manifold comes from here, the PCV system. So they come in with an oil catch can and install it in the middle, interrupt this line basically. So either you can't cut it, it's a really hard line and it's formed, but you get a tube, you get this and feed it into the inlet of your tube. Call this a catch can, right? So you get this as your inlet in there, and then your outlet goes back into wherever this was dumping in. And sometimes people decide to just bypass and not put it, not send the PCV system into the intake manifold. They decide to vent it to the air or whatever you want to do. Sometimes I'll tell you the disadvantage of that is sometimes you end up with vacuum issues, but too, well, and this is really up to you and your conscience as to what it does to emissions, right? That's really up to you. Tractors do they ran that for a long time. So, the intention is usually good, but as I said, and the next, if I do make a detailed video, we'll be going a little deep, maybe not all the way to master's thesis level, but we'll be talking about Bernoulli's principle. We'll be talking about different things and how airflow affects pressure and things like that. But as I've hinted at it, you do sometimes, if you have oil consumption issues, sometimes you actually get air back, and this actually happens in normal operation, that air flows backwards sometimes, and that's when you usually get oil in front of your throttle body. But that's, as I said, we'll deal with that in different depth later. So whenever people get an oil catch can and install it functionally, it's somewhere between the PCV valve and this inlet, or they decide not to install it there, or likewise when they do it on the other side and have it somewhere in between here, the intention is usually good. However, sometimes the execution is what ends up being a little iffy. And as I've said, personally, I don't do it, but I'll tell you where you could do it if you wanted to do it. What happens, you've noticed it for the most part, these guys are pretty short, as short as I could make them, and they're hard lines, and there is a method to the madness, really, as to where everything was installed. There is a reason, and usually there are calculations that go with that. But then what happens is that sometimes you get people with catch cans, get a can here, install another one there, or sometimes in the back, then they get like 2 miles of hoses just running, 2 miles of tubes just running, crisscrossing all over the engine bay. And what happens is that, so what that does is it takes the whole functionality and leaves it to chance. One, the pressure drop across all your system and all your plumbing ends up making your PCV system pretty, ineffective in that you're not sucking anything. But sometimes what people end up doing is that they find a little bit of oil in there. And now this is where the catch comes in, right? When you find oil in your catch cans, whether you have 2 of them or just 1, should you assume that that's all you're consuming? Because sometimes what you end up with is a pass-through system. A little bit might make it into the catch can, but a lot of it is still going into the intake manifold, and as a result on the back of the intake valves. So it just really depends. You have to really know what you're doing. And as I said, some of it is on chance. The best way to do it, the best way to know what your consumption and to measure the effectiveness of your catch cans, this guy right here, right? So go back to your dipstick, where you park it level, measure it at, give it the same amount of time after stopping the engine, measure it, and then see what happens. But otherwise, if you just focus on your catch cans and say that, yep, I know what my catch cans are doing, you might end up in trouble, right? And then, as you probably kind of got the concept through this, Installing catch cans does not stop oil consumption. It just attempts to stop the oil consumption, or rather the oil that's been lost from the engine crankcase, from making it into your intake manifold and going there. It doesn't do anything for oil consumption. So this guy right here is still your best friend whenever it comes to oil and oil consumption. So I hope that kind of explains it. And as I said, we'll circle back and talk about oil catch cans. But the bulk, or at least the main concept I wanted to discuss in this video, was going to be the PCV valves, the PCV system, right? The positive crankcase ventilation. And as I said, about 4 main components I talk about: your intake tube, make sure that's good. You have the T that goes into the fresh air intake. You have the exit from the valve cover. And then you have the PCV valve itself. And I've shown other videos where you'd shake it, and if it doesn't rattle, you could try to clean it out, but functionality is not as good as new. It just never really goes back to that. So for people that maybe either don't care about PCV systems, or just wouldn't know a good PCV system from a bad one, maybe they don't care. Maybe you just bypass the whole thing, that's suddenly away. I've heard of people like drilling out the PCV valves and just having a tube out. So it's really up to you, but as designed, I think they work pretty well. I change mine at some regular frequency and everything is usually fine. So again, I'd like to go back to that beginning of the video, the thing I talked about in the beginning of the video, that this is a hybrid video. It's not exactly a how-to, but if you followed along and you wanted to install an oil catch can, I bet you know where to do it, where you'd be coming in and where you'd install it. Ideally shorter, hard lines, and make sure you get a good system. If you were to get, and now this goes into a whole different realm, like, do you want a baffled one? Do you not want a baffled one? How large should it be, And has anyone ever done the pressure drop across the can to know how effective it is, right? And sometimes you end up just designing a whole obstruction. But so that's a hybrid. The other part of it was going to be as I said, the how-to, and the why-to. Why should you use it? That's the principle behind your oil catch can, is that. And for turbocharged vehicles and other high oil consumption systems, yeah, definitely bigger value than just regular these direct injected engines, and surely almost useless for the port injected engines. But that's just personal opinion based on my education and my experiences. All right. So if you happen to skip through the beginning of the video where I was saying that, hey, this is the basic topic. If you want an oil catch can, this is where you put it. I'm saying it again. If you want to install an oil catch can in these, go for this tube, the one in the front. All right. This one here is your fresh air intake. And likewise on the other side, go for this one right here. This one right here, because this one here is your fresh air intake. All right. So all the best, no matter where you decide to go, no matter what path you decide to choose. I, as I said, I've got my own opinion. I have my preferences, but at the end of the day, as long as you are happy with what you're doing and it doesn't cause a safety issue for anybody else, well and good, go for it. All right. So I suppose we'll see. I know I do love sketching things out. Just helps things go better. And I think we're almost at 20 minutes or so on this video. It's way longer than I intended it to be, but I had to go deep enough to at least show you exactly what I'm looking at. And I do get carried away when I'm enjoying the topic. So all the best. Good luck. And if you do want a more technical video, we can try to do something, or because I do have a few engines, so I'm pretty sure we'll be able to put something together and talk about them. And we'll be able to talk about the VK56VD PCV system and what can be done about it, tear it apart. I did something it was something for the VK. This is the M45 engine, and here's the fresh air intake. and the PCV valve is all the way there in front. But generally, that's how they are. Fresh air in the back, PCV in front. That's for the V8s. All right. This time is for real. Goodbye.